The zoo's gorilla habitat was bustling with excited visitors. But there was something different in the air today. Zara, the usually lively and playful silverback gorilla, was not her usual self. Normally, Zara could be seen swinging from branches or playfully interacting with the crowd, but today she stood still at the far end of the enclosure, chewing absent-mindedly on a branch, her deep eyes lost in thought. She wasn't responding to the calls of the children trying to get her attention. Something wasn't right. The crowd outside the enclosure was enjoying their time. The children laughed and pointed at the animals, and the adults were busy lifting their little ones on their shoulders to help them see better. Liam's mother tried to focus on the gorillas, but her restless toddler had other plans. "Liam, don't climb that," she warned, her voice full of concern. But Liam, with his usual curiosity and determination, didn't listen. His tiny fingers gripped the railing, and his wide eyes focused on the gorillas as he leaned further and further forward. With each passing second, Liam's excitement grew, and the more he disregarded his mother's warnings. He was so close now, staring into the enclosure with wide eyes, mesmerized by the creatures inside. His curiosity got the best of him, and without realizing the danger, Liam leaned in even more. And then disaster struck. One moment, Liam was gripping the railing, and the next, he was gone. There was a blur of movement, a tiny gasp from the crowd, and then a dull thud. Silence. Liam's mother screamed, her heart racing as she looked down in horror. "Liam!" Her voice echoed through the zoo. People around her gasped in disbelief. Her child had fallen. Liam was lying face down on the ground, his small body still. He didn't appear injured, but he was too stunned to move. He had just fallen about 20 feet, and the shock of the fall had rendered him motionless. "My baby!" his mother cried out, her voice desperate. She rushed toward the enclosure, but the distance was too great. She reached the railing, shaking with fear. The zoo staff rushed toward the enclosure, but her focus was solely on Liam. The zookeepers were quick, assuring her that they would get her child out. "We'll get him out, ma'am," one of the zookeepers reassured her. The mother, her hands trembling, nodded, but she couldn't just wait. She needed to see her child, to hold him. She turned her eyes frantically around the zoo, searching for any opening she could run through. Anything to get to her son. But that's when her gaze met something unexpected. Her eyes connected with Zara, the massive 400-pound silverback gorilla at the far end of the enclosure. Zara, who had been standing still and quiet up until now, jerked her head toward the sound. The branch she had been chewing on slipped from her mouth, and her powerful body shifted. The ground seemed to shake with each of her heavy steps as she moved toward the source of the noise, toward Liam. The crowd went still, sensing the danger. The mother, panicked, screamed at the zookeepers. "Somebody stop her! Stop her!" she shouted, her voice filled with terror. The zookeepers, who had returned with the keys to the enclosure and tranquilizer guns, were already moving toward the emergency gate. But it was too late. Zara, a mother herself, had already heard the commotion. She was heading toward the boy. The mother's anxiety surged, her hands trembling as she reached out toward the railing, desperate to stop the gorilla from getting any closer to her son. The zoo staff scrambled to get to the tranquilizer rifle, but Zara moved with surprising speed. The crowd was paralyzed, watching in horror as Zara moved closer to Liam. People whispered in fear. Some women began to cry, while others turned their faces away, unable to watch what they feared would be an awful outcome. "What do you think will happen?" one woman whispered to her friend, her voice trembling. As the zookeepers made their way to the gate, Zara reached Liam. The crowd held their breath, waiting for the worst. But what happened next left everyone in stunned silence. Zara didn't attack. She didn't lash out or roar as everyone feared. Instead, with surprising gentleness, she bent down and wrapped her massive hand around Liam's tiny body. She lifted him effortlessly, her large frame dwarfing the child in her grasp. The crowd gasped. Some people had their eyes shut, unwilling to witness what seemed like an unfolding nightmare. But when they opened their eyes, they saw something unexpected. Zara, the silverback gorilla, was holding the child in her arms. The mother, still frozen in terror, watched as her son was cradled in Zara's enormous hands. For a moment, Liam's eyes grew wide in fear. His lips quivered, and it looked like he might cry. But then something even more astonishing happened. Zara, instead of harming him, gently cradled him to her chest as though comforting him. The crowd stood in awe as they watched Zara rock Liam slowly, almost protectively. A deep guttural sound rumbled from Zara's chest, not a growl, but something softer, a sound that could only be described as a lullaby. It was a sound of comfort, not danger. The gorilla, in a heartbreaking show of tenderness, pressed her broad lips to Liam's forehead, a kiss that seemed to echo the bond of motherhood, even across species. The mother, who had been standing in shock, finally let out a whimper. "Oh, God, please." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the unbelievable sight. Zara, the powerful, untamed gorilla, was comforting her child. Just then, the zookeepers returned, their radios crackling as they assessed the situation. One of them, seeing the scene, turned to the shaken mother. "She's comforting him," he pointed out in astonishment. The mother, still trying to process the surreal scene before her, whispered, "But why?" An experienced zookeeper, Mitchell, who had worked with Zara for years, understood immediately. He turned to the crowd and explained Zara lost her baby not long ago. An illness took him. She carried his lifeless body for days, refusing to let go. She grieved in ways we could never imagine. The revelation struck the crowd like a lightning bolt. They had all been watching a grieving mother, an animal's grief just like their own. The crowd fell into a profound silence as they realized the gravity of the moment. What they had thought would be a horrific scene had transformed into something entirely different. An emotional moment that left them all in awe of the deep emotions animals could experience. But Zara wasn't ready to let Liam go. The crowd began to sense a shift in the situation. As Zara moved closer to the fence with Liam still cradled in her arms, people started to hold their breath. Was she about to return the child to his mother? Or was she still holding on to him in the grip of her grief? Zara's actions became even more puzzling as she moved further into the enclosure, circling around the rocky outcrop. The crowd's anxiety grew. They urged the zookeepers to act, to do something. But the staff knew that they had to proceed with extreme caution. They couldn't risk startling Zara. A mother, whether human or animal, protecting her child is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. The zookeepers tried to make their move cautiously, but before they could act, Zara made an unexpected decision. She began to climb. The zoo enclosure was a place of curiosity and wonder for many. But as Zara, the 400-pound silverback gorilla, began climbing toward the rocky ledge, with the small child still cradled in her hands, a sense of unease swept through the crowd. It was a moment suspended in time. A gorilla, once a symbol of strength and power, now acting out of a profound maternal instinct. Zara's massive hand held the small body of Liam, the toddler who had accidentally fallen into her territory. His mother stood frozen in place, her mind racing as she watched in disbelief. Zara's movements were deliberate, but they were also filled with a surprising gentleness, as if she were trying to protect the child she had taken into her care. She stepped carefully, her large hands gripping the rocks with each movement. The audience held their breath, anxiously watching Zara's every move. The idea of a gorilla, one of the most powerful animals on Earth, climbing a rock face while holding a child in her arms was a sight no one could have anticipated. Yet here it was, unfolding before their eyes. Mitchell, a seasoned zookeeper who had worked with Zara for years, understood exactly what was happening. He knew Zara's history, her grief, her mourning, and her deep connection to the loss of her own baby. He could see it in the way she moved with the child, as if she were trying to fill the emptiness inside her. It was as though Zara was trying to revive the bond she had lost, holding onto Liam as if he were the child she had lost months ago. The zookeepers around Mitchell exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. They had anticipated that Zara might become agitated or even aggressive, but this was something entirely different. She wasn't showing signs of aggression. She was showing signs of love, of grief. But the danger remained, and every person present was aware of it. They could not afford to make a wrong move. Zara climbed higher, her body powerful and graceful, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. With each step, the crowd's anxiety grew. Every parent in the vicinity instinctively pulled their children closer, fearful that something might go wrong. The mother of Liam was no exception. Her hands gripped the iron railing with such force that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were locked on Zara, unable to look away, even though she was terrified of what might happen next. Zara's ascent seemed endless. She reached higher and higher, with Liam still held carefully in her hands. The toddler, who had been so stunned by the fall, was slowly beginning to recover. His wide eyes, once filled with fear, began to soften. He was no longer crying. Instead, he looked up at the creature holding him, mesmerized by the way Zara moved. It was as though Liam, in his innocence, had begun to understand that this was not a danger, but a form of protection, albeit from an unexpected source. The crowd stood still, frozen in a mixture of fear and awe. Some of them had turned away, unable to watch the scene unfold, while others couldn't help but watch in utter disbelief. No one had expected this. No one had thought that a gorilla would act with such tenderness. But Zara was not just any gorilla. She was a mother, and this moment, despite its terrifying context, was driven by the same instinct that had shaped her life, a mother's instinct. As Zara climbed higher, the situation became even more precarious. The thought crossed everyone's mind. What if Zara lost her grip? What if the child slipped from her hands? The crowd collectively held their breath, knowing that any misstep could lead to disaster. But Zara continued to move with purpose, as though she had a singular mission in mind. She had taken Liam, and she was determined to protect him. Mitchell, standing with the other zookeepers, felt his heart racing. He had trained for moments like this. But this was different. This wasn't about controlling a situation. It was about understanding an animal's grief, an animal's heart. Zara was mourning, and in her mourning, she had found something she thought she had lost. A child to care for, even if only for a moment. The zookeepers knew they had to act, but they also knew that they couldn't act hastily. One wrong move could lead to chaos. They couldn't risk startling Zara, or else she might lash out. The situation had escalated from a potential attack to a delicate balance of emotions. They had to proceed with the utmost care. Mitchell finally made a decision. He knew what Zara needed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, faded blue blanket. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to Zara. It was the same blanket she had used to wrap her deceased baby in. The memory of the blanket was powerful. Its scent, its texture, the way it had comforted her during the painful days after her baby's death. As Mitchell slowly walked toward the rocky ledge, the crowd watched with bated breath. He held the blanket out to Zara, making sure she could see it. He spoke softly, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "It's yours, sweetheart," he said gently, his eyes never leaving the gorilla. For a long moment, Zara didn't move. She looked at the blanket in Mitchell's hands, her dark eyes flicking between him and the child still cradled in her arms. The crowd waited, suspended in time, as Zara processed the situation. She was still grieving, but this gesture, this small piece of the past, seemed to stir something within her. She knew that blanket. It had been a part of her life during a time when everything had been turned upside down. Finally, with a deep rumbling sound, Zara shifted her weight. She took a step back from the ledge and then slowly, carefully, began to descend. The entire crowd exhaled in unison, the tension breaking as Zara made her way down the rocky surface. Her massive feet pressed firmly against the ground as she lowered herself, step by step, holding Liam tightly, but with great care. Mitchell stayed close, his voice soft and encouraging as he guided her down. "That's a good girl, Zara. You're doing great," he whispered. The crowd remained still, watching as Zara, the grieving mother, slowly returned Liam to safety. The descent was slow, but with each step, the crowd's hope grew. Zara's descent was a powerful reminder of the strength of motherhood, the lengths a mother will go to protect her child. Whether human or animal, the bond between a mother and her offspring is unbreakable. And in that moment, Zara showed the world the depth of her love and her grief. As Zara reached the ground, the crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. But they knew the hardest part wasn't over yet. The most delicate part of the process was still ahead. Would Zara release Liam back to his mother? Or had she formed a bond with the child she had so gently cradled? Mitchell, still holding the blanket, moved closer to Zara, hoping that the familiarity of the object would help ease her. He extended the blanket to her once more, hoping to draw her attention. Zara's dark eyes flicked between Mitchell and the child, and then, as though making a decision, she carefully reached for the orange fruit that Mitchell had brought with him. She took it gently from his hand, her massive fingers wrapping around it. With a sudden, unexpected movement, Mitchell lunged. His arms reached out quickly and wrapped around Liam's small body, pulling him free from Zara's grip. The crowd gasped in shock, the tension that had built for what felt like hours suddenly breaking with a cry of relief. The mother, who had been watching the scene unfold in desperation, burst into tears. Her son was safe. She rushed toward the gate, her hands trembling as she reached out for her child. Liam, still in shock, clung to Mitchell's shirt as they sprinted toward the gate. His mother was already there, her arms open wide. She collapsed to her knees as she pulled him into her embrace, tears streaming down her face as she pressed him close to her chest. "My baby," she sobbed. "My baby." The crowd erupted into applause, their fear turning into astonishment. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied all expectations. Zara the gorilla had acted out of grief, but she had also shown an incredible level of care. The bond between mother and child, whether human or animal, had been at the heart of this incredible story. As Mitchell stood back, watching the reunion between mother and child, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Zara had not been violent. She had not attacked. She had simply been a grieving mother trying to find solace in a child who was not her own. And in that moment, she had shown the world just how powerful love and loss can be. But Zara was not finished. She stood motionless in the enclosure, her deep eyes locked on the mother and child as they embraced. She had lost a child, and now, as she stood there with the blanket in her hands, she had found something new, a sense of peace perhaps, or at least a way to begin healing. Mitchell turned to the other zookeepers, who were watching in silence. He caught their eyes and spoke quietly. Zara wasn't attacking. She was mourning. He said softly, "She needed this child just as much as he needed her." The news of the rescue quickly spread. The video of Zara cradling Liam went viral, sparking debates about the emotional intelligence of gorillas and other animals. Some were surprised at how clearly Zara's actions reflected a deep emotional understanding. Others were moved by the bond between the grieving gorilla and the child. The zoo, in response to the overwhelming support from the public, began to make plans for Zara's future. They decided to provide her with a new companion, an orphaned baby gorilla. And when the crate door opened and the small gorilla stumbled into the enclosure, Zara didn't hesitate. She moved to the baby, reaching out and pulling it close. For the first time since her own loss, Zara had found another little one to care for. The zookeepers and the crowd watched as Zara cradled the baby, her instincts kicking in. She was a mother once more. And so, the story of Zara's grief, her mourning, and her unspoken connection to the child who had fallen into her care ended on a note of healing and renewal.